It seems like it's only a matter of time until we see a game that we won't be able to distinguish from reality. I'm not sure if any of you have seen this, but there was this game floating around social media a year ago, and it resurfaced again recently. The game features close-quarters combat between police and criminals, however. Unlike a traditional video game where you're in first or third person, this game is played through the perspective of an officer's body cam. It's a really interesting idea that I hadn't thought of before. But what's even more amazing is the graphical fidelity this game has. It's almost indistinguishable from real life, and it had a lot of people on social media asking themselves if this was a game or actual body cam footage from a shootout. Debate raged on until one of the devs for the game showed critics a video of him flying around an engine and playing the game. This made me wonder to myself, what are the graphics in GTA 6 going to look like? For one, the developers of this police game were working on the new Unreal Engine 5. For those of you who aren't familiar, Unreal Engine is a video game engine produced by Epic Games. Yes, the one that also makes Fortnite. A video game engine is basically the foundation of a video game. There's plenty of engines out there, but most games, especially on PC, use either Unity or Unreal. These engines allow developers to actually create their games, from the 3D assets to cutscenes and game mechanics. Without these, you wouldn't have any modern games. This engine is easily one of the best available to developers right now, so it's no wonder that Rockstar decided to ditch the outdated Rage engine they used in GTA 5 for this beast. That's right, the next GTA is going to be using the full power of Unreal 5. Not only is Unreal 5 a huge upgrade in visuals, but it also can improve the performance of games. There are a bunch of new features and systems in Unreal 5, but for this video, I'm going to be touching on just two. One of the newest and most interesting features of Unreal 5 is Nanite. In the simplest terms, Nanite allows developers to finely compress geometry, and this makes rendering data very efficient and much faster. This means you can get better visuals without suffering as much of a hit on your frame rate. It also means that buildings and objects are going to look a lot better, due to the fact that they can fit more polygons into them, meaning sharper graphics than ever before. The other feature is Lumen Global Illumination. Lumen allows developers to create dynamic lighting in real time, foregoing a lot of the extra steps you had to take in Unreal Engine 4 to create light maps. Essentially, this is going to massively affect lighting in games going forward. We're basically going to get avatar-level lighting with this technology, and it's going to impact how we play games in several ways, from just a purely graphical standpoint, as well as how we actually play games. But then there is also ray tracing, which is somewhat similar to Lumen, but still different. I'm sure most of you have seen or at least heard of ray tracing, but for those who haven't, this is how it works. Ray tracing is a technique that can realistically simulate the lighting of a scene or object by rendering accurate reflections and shadows. It's a relatively new technology, much like the previous two, but it's come a long way since its initial release in 2018 for Nvidia cards. The first game that really pushed ray tracing was Battlefield 5. The difference between ray-traced and non-ray traced was huge, but the toll it took on your system was even greater. As I said, this technology has come a long way, but back in 2018, it required a top-of-the-line setup. Unless you had the absolute best hardware at the time, you were not going to get a stable 60 FPS. And for most people, it was more like 30 frames. Nowadays, ray tracing is a lot more refined, and more systems can run it smoothly. There are some games on console that can run ray tracing at 60 FPS, and even some mid-tier PCs can run these settings now. All of this is to say that GTA 6 is going to be a massive upgrade from 5. Look at the difference between GTA 5 and Red Dead 2. Those games are 5 years apart but on the same engine, using Rockstar's Rage. No offense to GTA 5, but Red Dead 2 looks beautiful all around. The models are much nicer, the lighting is improved, the physics are way better, and the game just looks better overall. That's not to say that GTA 5 doesn't look good. It's actually aged incredibly well for a game that was released a decade ago, and it still holds up well against most recent releases. But here, the difference in engine quality and 5 more years since Red Dead Redemption 2 is going to give us one of the most realistic, beautiful, and immersive video games ever. These games were also released on the PS3 and PS4 back in 2013 and 2018, when console hardware was considerably worse than it is today. The leap from the PS3 to PS4 was huge. When GTA 5 came out on last-gen consoles, it saw massive performance and visual upgrades compared to when it was originally released. Things like textures, vegetation, lighting, and weather systems saw drastic improvement. But the leap from PS4 to PS5 was arguably even bigger. Even on PS4, the norm was 30 FPS, with only PS4 Pro consoles getting higher on some games. Now basically all PS5 games, except for the ones with bugs and performance issues, are easily able to achieve 60 frames a second while looking almost as good as the PC versions of the game. This is thanks to much better processors, RAM, and graphics cards, which allow for higher resolution gameplay at higher frames. Not to mention that these consoles now feature state-of-the-art SSDs, greatly reducing load times in games, with some games having practically zero loading screens from start to finish. SSDs also can improve performance in certain games. There are some PC games that run awfully on hard drives, but buttery smooth on SSDs. But this is somewhat down to the increased hardware budget of certain games, as well as poor optimization. That being said, I'd love to see some improved destruction. There are a few things you can destroy in the game, like windows and cars, and sometimes boxes or other story-related items, but it's pretty rare to find something you can break in the open world. I'd like to see some small-scale environmental destruction, but nothing big. It wouldn't really make sense either. Imagine you destroy the entire city at the start of the game. How would you be able to finish it properly? I don't want to replicate battlefield lobbies in GTA 6. I don't think any system would be able to handle that either way, but I do want to be able to destroy some walls or vegetation, like bushes and small trees. I also really want Rockstar to focus on performance. I swear, every other game that's being released now is a total mess on launch. They're all filled with bugs and performance issues that make them unplayable at times, and at a $70 price point, that's just not acceptable. We all want Rockstar to take their time and just release a finished game that we can enjoy on day one without a bunch of extra patches. And I'm sure that they'll deliver. I think this game might just have the biggest launch of any video game ever, even beating Rockstar's previous record of $1 billion in 5 days with GTA 5. But we also need to consider one thing. Are realistic graphics always the best? Sure, it's cool that games are becoming more and more lifelike, and they're able to accurately simulate lighting, shadows, water physics, weather, and realistic-looking models. But is that always the right choice? While GTA 5 has some realistic graphical design, it's still a pretty stylistic game if you think about it. A game like Battlefield, I would argue, has more realistic graphics, and has always tried to push the limits on what hardware can achieve, but I would also argue that they don't hold up like some games do. I think this is simply down to a game's art style. Battlefield doesn't really have an art style. It's just realistic, and it's meant to actually look like real life, or as close as it can get. Let's take a look at Battlefield 4 so I can break this down further. This game was released the same year as GTA 5 in 2013. Let's put on our critic goggles and try to analyze this game's visuals. At the time of release, this game looked amazing. It was one of the most realistic video games we had ever seen, and you can argue it stayed that way until Battlefield 5 launched. However, this game doesn't look realistic to us now, and that's because the software to create games and the hardware to run them is considerably better than it was 10 years ago. If you were to launch Battlefield 4 in 2023 and claim it had the most realistic graphics, people would laugh at you. That's to say that it doesn't hold up 100% to our current day standards, even though I think the game still looks really good, even a decade plus after release. GTA 5, on the other hand, isn't too realistic and doesn't have a set art style, but it still holds up against a lot of recent releases. If I were to describe it, it's a little cartoony mixed with some realism, but it's not aiming to be fully realistic. By not trying to push the limits of the hardware to 100%, but also creating something that's still visually appealing at the same time, developers can create a game that stands the test of time. And I think that this is a conversation worth having. Which is better, realism or beautiful art style? Personally, I like games that have a unique and timeless style over ones that prioritize having the most cutting-edge graphics. But let me know what you think. What do you prefer? Realism or art style? Anyways, that's all for this video, and like always, I'll see you next time.